Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm so excited today to be sitting with the absolutely divine Phoenix Rose and to be able to have a little conversation with her and with you guys. And we are going to be talking about Lemuria today. So, actually, because some of my friends here might not be familiar with you or your work, would you care to share just a brief introduction?
Totally. Yeah, I love that we're double phoenixing, which seems to be a theme of this last year for me.
Yeah.
I'm Phoenix. I'm a vibrational healer, and I consider myself a leader of healers. So I train people in healing modalities, ranging from energy healing to psychic development to trauma and tantra. Anything that's in that esoteric vein is pretty much my wheelhouse. So when we're talking about Lemuria, it's a time out of this time. So in some ways, it requires that esoteric access in order to be able to remember Lemuria. So anything in that
Yeah.
world is kind of my jam. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you're so magical. I was a guest speaker at an event that Phoenix did back in February, called High Level Healers. And, there was just kind of an immediate connection and an energetic between the two of us. And, we kind of pinged each other and we're like, I think maybe someday we're going to do a collab. Like maybe we should circle back to that. And so here we are. Um, and, when we connected again a few weeks ago, actually, Phoenix shared that she had had a dream wherein I came to her and was talking with her about Lemuria. And I was really hit by that because that has been a place that I have been really called. Um, I mean, I would say that some would call me like a Lemurian sound healer, So I've always sort of had these roots there that come through in my work, but I've been called more recently to teach about it, to speak about it, to transmit Lemurian codes in a much more direct way. So when she brought this to me, I was like, get out of town. And, a lot sort of ensued from there. But for people who don't know, um, actually, maybe you could share, Phoenix, like, what is Lemuria?
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, I love that this was born out of a prophetic dream in a way,
Yeah.
because we were getting ready to hop on the call, and hours, like right before I woke up, I had the dream. And it was a perfect bridge into our collaboration. It was magical alignment.
Very
So
magical.
Lemuria, you might often hear it referred to as Mu. Also, Mu represents the motherland of where the Lemurians lived. Now, the civilization was no more around 12 to 14,000 years ago, depending on how you're looking at history. But this was a multi-million year civilization of beings that maybe weren't from Earth, but came to Earth for a certain development and growth. In the beginning stages of Lemuria, these beings were very corporeal and light bodied. They didn't have a whole lot of density. And of course, as millions of years went by and things began to change on the planet, they sunk more and more into a form. But it was a time on the planet where, because there wasn't so much density, there was a lot of innocence and purity and higher frequency vibrations that were present in the beings of Lemuria, which is also what led us to this collaboration on this topic of love and relationships, and sort of bringing and remembering the Lemurian way of love, which is obviously existing in some of us as the transmission is coming through. But in my personal experience of the world right now, it's a way of love and relating that's become forgotten,
Hmm.
and diluted and dense, not as pure. So that's why we're here. The Lemurian way of
Absolutely.
love. Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty apparent the level of distortion that, we have around relationships and even the word love and kind of the way that that is coded and what people think of when they hear that word and just there's so much that is out of resonance with what Phoenix and I are calling the Lemurian way. The Lemurian consciousness, and it is a consciousness as I connect to it. There are beings and there's a history and everything, but it really is a consciousness, a state of being, that is extremely heart based. And some of us might have memory, whether we consciously have like visual attached to that memory or story attached to that memory. I think we have memory in our bodies, or we have this kind of cellular memory that can come through, where we've touched into this way of relating to ourselves, to each other, to the land, to the animals, to all of the beings of planet Earth, that is unified, that is harmonious, that is really, it's almost like I don't even want to use the term love based because of how coded that word is. You know what I mean? I think harmonious, right? In awareness of oneness, in a sense, in a place where like we just don't have access to that by and large, like in our day to day, I think. But it's not oneness in at the same level as, if you get higher up in dimensions and everything, because as you said, like they were still on planet Earth and they were individual consciousnesses. So there is this duality in the realm, but it's like, how do we relate to that duality and relate to one another in a way that actually maintains harmony and holds that awareness of oneness? That's sort of how I see Lemurian love-based consciousness.
Yeah, there were so many gems in there. And this is another place where Julia and I connected over our experience in trauma and relational healing. And
Mhm.
that was another very synchronistic, aligned place of, okay, well, as this transmission, it was almost as if we were being sent a transmission from Lemurian consciousness to
Yes.
bring forth to y'all. And that there was something else moving because the encounter was so magical, so synchronistic, so harmonious that it was Lemuria. It was
Yeah.
Lemuria in this day and age. And we're realizing, and part of our discussions were around the fact that we're on Earth now, and Lemuria existed 12 to 14,000 years ago. And there's some people like me who want to go back there. I don't like Earth now. It's very uncomfortable for me. I miss the integral way of being where we were transparent and can see everything, and there wasn't a whole lot of lies and deceit and bad juju and all of that stuff. So I've in this lifetime longed and grieved so deeply for Lemuria as it was. But
Mhm.
what's real is we're here right now and we are
Yeah.
in this age and we're here for a reason. And so we're curious about exploring, how do we remember Lemuria in this time, in this density, in this relational field, and have that be our level of mastery, our new experience, bridging the worlds so that they can work together.
Yeah, exactly. I love what you shared there. And I think this is like the core piece for me, is that it's like, I think when we think about these past timelines and incarnations and we feel this remembrance, and people do the same thing with like, who are star seeds with like their alien incarnations, and there's this desire to return somewhere, to leave, to go back, to go home, to kind of be in this other field where things functioned really differently. But it's like, in my perspective, like is a there is a divinity to the perfection of how things unfold, including the fall. Like there's a reason why that happened. There's a reason why things are as they are now. This is just my personal perspective. I'm not sure how you feel about it, even though, depending on the day, I might have different thoughts and feelings about it. But it's like, I really feel like the call is like to acknowledge like, no, we're not going backwards. Like that's not what's happening. This is what is. And we have access in our DNA, in our bodies, in our fields to this other way of being, many of us. And if you're called to this, if you're called to this live, if you're like really sparked by any discussion of Lemuria, it's really likely that you have that remembrance and that it's been waking up inside of you, you know, and so it's like there's a reason for that. It's time,
Mhm.
you know? That's why a lot of us are here. Like it's time to bring this paradigm into our lives now in the density that we are in currently in our bodies, you know? And I'm really also interested in this in terms of like business relationships and the way that we relate to money and the way that we relate to resources and of course the way that we relate to each other. So it's not going to be, you know, the event that that Phoenix and I are doing. It's not just going to be like, let's just go out there and go back and like, let's just for like an hour and 2 hours and feel amazing and then be plopped back down here and resent everything and not know how to integrate anything. Like that's not helpful, right? So, um, and Phoenix and I have both had a really similar focus too, I think, with relationships and with trauma. And many of you know that, you know, I almost exclusively taught in those areas for years before I started doing the work with DNA that I do now. I'm just flipping through the comments here. This live found me. Yes, you're all here for a reason. Exactly.
Yeah, I also love that when Julia and I had our first conversation, it was maybe the same day or very soon after all of these questions about Lemuria started popping up on her
Huh.
page. And it was just very, again, the magic really continued to unfold. So we're listening.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's been such a beautiful experience for me because, you know, there's this way where with business stuff, I think it can be easy. I'll just speak for myself, but I have also seen this in others and heard this from others. I'm not sure what your experience is, Phoenix, but where we can get into a lot of self will and force, you know, and we are creating from the mind as far as like, well, this is what works, or this is what my coach told me to do, or like, this is how it's supposed to look because I need to make this amount of money. And then having this many people in the container makes sense. And me talking about this makes sense. And I have a certificate to talk about this. So that makes sense. And then, you know, and then we're like, well, this timing makes sense. And so we're going to do, and there's so much exhaustion I think that comes from that model and that way of doing things, yet it's so normalized. And this was just an experience of I've been likening it to like riding a wave that just finds you and you just kind of hop on and you follow it, you know, but it there is like, at least for me, there has been like zero of that kind of interference. It's just allowing something to be created through you. And it's really from a place of love and service. And this is, I feel like, how, you know, it's the Lemurian way of business, so to speak. I don't know. I'm curious to hear, like, if that resonates for you, Phoenix, or what your experience has been like with that.
There's a lot in there for me. You know, Julia knows that I've been on social media for the last 4 to 6 weeks. I was growing a bit disenchanted with the relational dynamics online, which for me have really changed in the last couple of years.
Yes.
You know, engagement is less, you're having to perform on reels or things like that more. And it was no longer coming from this authentic, vulnerable place inside of me. I was kind of in the motions of the wheel of have to post, but then there's not engagement. I'm
Mm,
wasting my time. And so I took a break to just be, take space. And another thing I needed to take space from was relationships in the business realm, because I experienced a lot of people in the last couple of months pulling out of contracts, negating their word, not honoring their commitments. And it was just boom, 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 one right after the other. And I had to step back and reevaluate what is happening here. What is the lesson? What is the medicine? What am I, how am I going to pivot moving forward? And this is another place where the relational dynamic is really up for me. And at the same time, I'm such a shamanic practitioner. I don't fit in the cookie cutter box. I never have. I've always shined when I followed my unique brilliance. And I actually hired multiple coaches last year and tried to do it their way, and it did not work. And I spent $25,000 on things that did not work. And so for me, this year has been a dismantling of old
Yeah.
energies and an emergence of something that's more raw, a little bit different.
Yeah.
That's a different sort of transmission. And I'm having to break apart all these parts of my ego and structure. And you were talking about like the dollar amount and
Mhm.
the time frame and all of these things. I've been in a multiple year healing process that I wanted to be over 3 years ago.
Relatable.
Yeah. But that's not what's emerging. So
Yeah.
how do we flow with what's emerging? Ride
Yes.
those currents, pull back when the wave ebbs. I'm wet in the
Yes.
ocean. Actually, I just went swimming with the mermaids in
Oh, I
Lemuria.
didn't realize it was it, did you go to the okay. Oh yeah, that's right. You're in Asheville. I'm like,
Yeah, I
what?
was swimming in the waves.
No,
Yeah,
Lemuria is about truth, you guys. Okay, it's like this is just a joke.
yeah, just a joke. I was riding the metaphysical waves.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, no, but this is an important component of Lemurian consciousness is I love how you talk about like the transparency that's there too. And just it is the meeting of what is. And not just the allowing of what is in a way that, we feel the futility behind it and kind of collapse under it. It's like the meeting of what is, and being able to really just sort of masterfully move with what is. So in this way, though, there's this requirement for a deep connection to truth. And I also find that that's an incredibly important requirement for relationships of all kinds, right? Um, and when we experience the lack of that inside of relationship, I think it's easy to go into a space where we shut down, you know, or where we hide, particularly if we're really sensitive and we sort of value these things. And it's similar with, thank you so much for sharing your process, by the way, with what you've been going through recently with regard to business and everything. And I'm seeing this everywhere for a lot of people where there's like a deep reevaluation and sort of like a take a step back and like hold on, like what am I doing? There's been some sense of like, okay, there I've been in some kind of an illusion, or I've been following a way that isn't true, or that doesn't feel right actually in my body, that doesn't feel in alignment. And there's this kind of resetting happening. I know I've been experiencing it for myself in my own way. um so yeah, this endeavor with you has felt like this really beautiful, just sort of what would be the word, it's a blossoming of a way that feels um so just like so true and so aligned with my heart and my body and my spirit and my mind, right? And I'm like, I want it all to feel this way, you know. And it's also collaboration, right? Like this is, I was thinking about this as well, like that is also in the spirit of Lemuria, is like we are sharing our um our power, our voices, our space, our hearts with other leaders. And there is so much tremendous benefit to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, so much there. Yeah, you touched on I noticed as you shared, there's a couple of pieces that really touched the grief in my heart.
Mm,
One being, highly sensitive, and when people are not honest in relationships, it's really impactful for me. I see it, I sense it, it impacts my heart, it impacts, if it's a business relationship, it impacts my livelihood, it impacts every aspect of my life. And, I
mm,
came back on social media yesterday in preparation for this, and I shared some vulnerable, raw truth about my story of the last couple of weeks, which business hasn't been going well.
mm.
Um, because I had a 6-person retreat and 3 people dropped out all on the same day a week before it started. So I didn't have time to fill it again.
Yeah.
I had these contracts, I had people on video giving their word, and then I had them like withdrawing all at one time. So it was this huge wave, a slap wave that
Mm,
was pretty brutal for me. And then, my attempt always, because I'm super compassionate, I'm super generous, I don't work like other coaches, I'm not usually super rigid. I'm like, let's find our way through
mhm,
together. I know that life
mhm,
happens. Let's find our way through together. I invite you to relational process. And some of these people were not willing to show up for relational process
mhm,
when we could have found an easy way together. But when people are not willing to rise to the occasion, to find that coherent mutual space, then I do feel my heart getting harder, or the Kali energy has to come out,
mm.
and say no. Like I'm a
Yeah.
no to this type of relational process that is lacking in integrity, that is running away from difficulty, that isn't honest. I'm a no at this phase in my life. I'm such a yes to the Lemurian way. I am such a yes, and I'm certainly the one that's like, I feel Lemuria, and then crap, I'm coming back to now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like thunk, so there's this way where, we're trying to find the integration, but I love that you're sharing this, Phoenix. I think
Mhm,
it's so relatable, and I think it's important to hold that no too, and to be really clear. So it's like, it's not just this loosey goosey, I don't have boundaries type of a thing either, because that is not aligned with what the reality of human consciousness is today. Like, we must have these distinctions, these boundaries, our yeses and nos must be really, really clear. And also within ourselves, I think for me, just reflecting on what you shared, the way that it's shown up more recently, for me, it has just been like feeling into places where I've been a no for myself and ignored that. And a lot of that actually is more to do with the way that I show up in business, and just like places where it's like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do, like I was talking about, and the disresonance, the disharmony that creates in your body and in your field and in your being, when you're actually not in truth with yourself, in that, or like, I think this shows up for people inside of relationships where we want to cloud over certain realities that are there, or we want to hide certain things that are unsavory, or we want to not bring certain things forward, um, or be an acceptance of what is, because there's so much fear, and because of survival, and then with business there's the money element that you kind of add in. It's rough, you guys. Like, we're not saying this shit is easy. That's the whole point. That's why we're gathering together to do this, because the truth is that it's not actually that easy to hold that energy, um, and interface with modern life,
mhm, mhm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. So Julia and I are collaborating on a 2-day workshop called Lemurian Love, which is a combination of remembrance of Lemuria, history of Lemuria, psychic, Akashic record practices to remember Lemuria and how it applies to you, as well as relational practices. How do
Yeah.
we bring that energy of Lemuria into the now, is particularly in our relationship dynamics? And the relationship can be to money, to work, to friends, to partner, to body. I noticed that some
Mhm.
people are like, well, I'm not having relational issues, but my body's falling apart. I'm like, you are having a relational
Right.
issue. It's just with your body.
Yeah.
The eye, you can also be challenged by the eye. And yeah, a beautiful bridging of, my mystical skills, her sonic activations, DNA shifting, actual history, and then embodied practice for cultivating and remembering and bringing forth that Lemurian way of love, which is more integrous. It's very honest, it's very transparent, it's super vulnerable, and it's
Mhm.
gonna hurt a lot more in this world, probably because of the state of things, but it's also imperative for changing the state of things.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it
And right
is.
now, yeah, you mentioned it is not easy right now. And in Lemuria, in the beginning stage of Lemuria, it was super easy. It was all membranous
Yes, it
and you could
was.
bake and create form, and there was none of this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's why people are like, "Oh my God, I want to go back there." It was this time of really just incredible purity and unity and sort of delight in one another and the planet and the abundance that was here. I mean, it's kind of a utopian, you could say, experience. And also, like one thing I wanted to mention about Lemuria too is that the consciousness is something that I experience as very feminine. I feel Atlantis has a more masculine element. And so this is also like linked in, I think, with the return of Lemuria. It is that feminine consciousness, which is concerned with truth, which is concerned with relating, with with the emotional component of relationship, like all of those things. Um, oh, what was I going to share here? I just went blank a little bit, but I do actually want to acknowledge some of these comments before we share details about the event. Welcome, welcome. I one more thing actually. I'm really excited to experience. I mean, my DNA activations are going to be bomb, just like always. And there's going to be some journeys where you're going to be able to connect in with your own memories and timelines in Lemuria and be able to feel this energetic in your body. You know, it's going to be very heart expanding and very activating. And the field is already very powerful. I can feel it. But what I'm also really looking forward to is the element of active relational practice that actually Phoenix is bringing in. So if you're into that kind of thing, if that's your jam, if you want to like actually practice this kind of interfacing with other human beings in a new way, it'll be a great choice for you.
Oh yeah, I want to go into some history, but we can pause for some comments.
Okay.
I'm going
Yeah.
to talk about Atlantis Lemuria connection and the Aloha way of relating. Just
Okay,
right for
beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for putting a pin in that. Transparency. I love that word and probably the word that's coming up the most in my life. Yeah. And I know this person who wrote this comment. Like, you are a being who values, I would say transparency is like one of your highest values. Like, it's all over your field. Like, it's who you are. You know what I mean? So this makes so much sense. Um, I'm a hider, lol. Super relatable, okay? Like and there are so many ways that we hide, right? It's not just that we don't connect with people. I mean, people hide by performing. People hide by just withholding, withholding information, withholding truths from themselves or others. Okay, people are resonating. Excellent. All right, you can go on ahead, Phoenix,
awesome.
with those topics.
Yeah, I guess for those of you that are tuning in live, I would love to know some relational challenges that you've experienced in this lifetime, maybe recently, or repeating patterns, just so maybe we could touch on those pieces a little bit or actually include them in the relational practice in the
Mm.
workshop. But I wanted to talk about Lemuria and Atlantis and the difference between the two. So, Atlantis was a sister society that existed around the same time as Lemuria on the planet. We're talking about West Coast, East Coast, basically, different land
I
masses.
never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
That's funny.
If you think about it, the West Coast way is like shaka, hang loose, very open hearted. um,
Yeah.
can tend to be more earth-based. East Coast, technology, tall buildings,
Mm,
advancement of careers, that sort of thing. So Lemuria was very earth-based, nature-based. Again, in the beginning of Lemuria, it was this creative energy. It was as if the Lemurians came here to actually create form on the planet through the
mhm.
consciousness of Lemuria. And, at the time you could think and grow a fruit on the tree and you didn't actually need to eat it because you were so transparent and light bodied, but you could eat it for the pure pleasure of that creation. They were very much a community culture. There was, in both civilizations, Atlantis and Lemuria, there were priestesses of different
Yes.
varieties, sonic priestesses, musicians, things of that nature that had power through their voice to move mass, to move matter through singing, chanting, all of these things. The Atlanteans were, and the more recent iterations of Atlantis were scientists and engineers. They wanted
Mhm.
to advance and research and study, and they were very much of a more masculine, purpose driven mind, whereas Lemurians were all about relationship and enjoyment and
More about being.
being, just
Yeah.
being versus doing. And, in some of the histories, these two civilizations became in conflict.
Mm,
And so, and here, maybe this is where that original relational conflict actually stemmed from. It's hard to pinpoint it for certain. When did things begin to change? It's all speculation at this point in time, but we can certainly access the Akashic records to find out what's true for our history and
right.
experience. And then the culture that most currently represents the Lemurian way is the Hawaiian culture.
Yeah.
The Hawaiians believe in aloha, and aloha means hello, it means love, it means light, it means so many things with that one word. And in the Hawaiian language, there's it's a smaller alphabet and there's no negative words in the alphabet, meaning every combination creates a sound and a tonation that inspires positive energy. That's
Hmm.
how the language was created because the Hawaiians believed they were sung into existence,
Hmm.
and and their language is very indicative of using the voice to create. So there are no negative words in the
Yeah.
Hawaiian language.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Which is very much like Lemurian language.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, the Hawaiians today are the ones that the traditional native Hawaiians, the kahunas, are the beings alive today that most closely practice the Lemurian way on the planet today, and certain Aboriginal cultures as well. But the Hawaiians, they're dialed in. So, I'm going to teach a relational process that I'm calling aloha, a step-by-step process for doing relational practice, for healing relational wounds, for coming into relational transparency and integrity,
Mm.
for facing challenges. And Julia and I, this is also an important point. Julia and I are the type of people that lean into challenge over and over and over again. It's who we are and what we do. But we realized a place where we're overriding ourselves is the parts that want to run away, we don't allow them to run away.
Correct.
We're like, let's lean into the challenge when there's this part that's like, I need to run. And some of you run versus leaning into challenge. And we have our own way of
Right.
overriding our system. So that's
Exactly.
important too. How do we allow the part that wants to run, take space, but then also we come back to do this work of aloha, of love.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So again, we're asking for if anyone wants to share about any relational challenges they're having currently, or anything that you feel like would be relevant to the workshop, just giving space for that. Um, I want to share this comment. I was a part of a scientific research team until I realized what the advancements were really being used for and tried to stop them for continuing to be developed. So this is in Atlantis, I'm assuming. I used to dream about it all the time. That's a really strong remembrance that you have.
Mhm.
I do resonate and relate to both Lemurian and Atlantean energies. Yeah, and I think many people um, beings who are drawn to a live like this, or an event like this may have connections to both. I certainly do. I think, I have much stronger connections to Lemuria, but again, we have to look at the fact that Lemuria existed for immensely longer than Atlantis did too. So it's common that people may have more lifetimes in Lemuria, even if they had prominent Atlantean lifetimes. And this is something where it's like, if you're curious about your own history here, the work that Phoenix does, I think the DNA activation work as well can bring on for sure remembrance for people, that gives them context or gives them story if that's what they're sort of interested in. But I think the work that you do, um, Phoenix, with your shamanic journeying and everything like that really can, for people who don't have that kind of clear connection or clear memory, um, that they can tap in that way.
Yeah, we are going to be journeying to remember. And again, I remember being in an Atlantinian mystery school, Damanhur. I studied with Damanhur for a while, and they kept, they're very Atlantinian based. They do a lot of research in Italy, and they have a mystery
Mm,
school. Um, but they're very mystically advanced as well. And they kept trying to get us to do these journeys to Atlantis. And I kept popping into Lemuria over and over and over again. And I just realized I'm deeply Lemurian, and I was. I do have a recollection, whether it's spiritual memory, actual memory, whatever, of being taken as a slave into Atlantis for experimentation.
mm,
Because the Atlanteans would experiment. They would do DNA splicing. They would actually combine bodies. So, our Minotaur, Centaur, half animal, half human, those were all Atlantean experiments. They actually did create
mm,
crossbred beings, genetic modification, which we're still doing today in our own ways with fruits and vegetables. It
yeah.
was very much a common practice in Atlantis. Yeah.
Yeah, and it does feel that in our global history, like Atlantis is where some of those distorted elements that have just kind of woven throughout history since then sort of took root. But I also want to be clear that, like, it's not that Atlantis was like this dark society or something. There were people in certain positions of power, that at a certain point in time began, took things down a particular path, and this was
Mhm.
leading up to the fall. But the consciousness of the Atlantean people is not necessarily negative. It's not like it's this like horrible dark place or anything like that. In fact, there are some incredibly beautiful, incredibly powerful elements to it, and incredible wisdom there. But again, the consciousness happens to be, it's just a different frequency. And when you become attuned to frequency, you can actually start to just kind of feel the differences in the consciousness. And Lemurian, again, is a more feminine consciousness. Atlantis is more masculine. And, we know that distorted masculine consciousness is something that has been a huge problemo here on planet Earth for us. So there is that. But the other thing I wanted to share here, and then I'm gonna read a few comments that we've gotten about the relational stuff, is just that I think that some people get really caught up in a mental understanding of the history, and they want to know exactly the timelines, and when did Lemurians descend into physical beings, and when did this happen, and when did that happen, and how was it all, what did it all look like, and all of these details and facts, right? And the thing that Phoenix and I were talking about when we first got together to talk about this was, like, you can listen to like three different people speaking about Lemurian history and get three different answers that actually contradict each other. And that's because, you know, this is mostly people's experiences and their channeled information. This is not something that where we have like, well, this artifact is this amount of years old based on this form of testing, and so we know that it's not that, right? And so where my focus really is with it personally is, it is about a connection to the consciousness, and it is about the connection to the energetic and how you relate to that, right? And it's about your understanding of Lemuria that's relevant to you in the here and now, right?
Yeah. Yeah, super good point. I geek out. I've studied Atlantean and Lemurian history for years,
Yeah,
actually, through research and reading. And yeah, I will read two books back to back that are completely contradictory. I mean, the same
yeah,
would be true if Julia told the history of the United States and I told the history because we live in different places. We've had
right.
totally different experiences. Our retelling of history would be really unique to our experience. So the Lemurian and Atlantean history is similar in that way. It's like we individuated. Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so it's less important, but it is really fun to talk about for sure. And I think people really love it. And so I'm not saying like let's not go there, um but I think like yeah, just for me it's important to really state that like the focus is that connection to that energy.
mhm. And when you get really good at exploring the Akashic records, as I'm going to teach in this workshop experience, you can go and ask all of those
Yes.
questions. If
Yes.
you're still, you want to know the
Yes.
dates and the timeline and all the things, it's all available. And we
Yes.
just need to develop your mystical access so that you can get the answers yourself.
Absolutely. And that's always the best source. Like when people ask me questions about Lemuria and they're like, "How do you know this, Julia?" Like, when I'm talking about I loved when you were talking about my lineage of the song priestesses. So I'm just like, like it feels so good. But when people ask me like how do you know like how they practiced and what that was for and or it's the same as when people ask me how do you know the syllables and the tones and the it's like my own channel. It's not it's like not something that I got anyplace else, right? And I think it's so powerful what you're saying that we all have our own channel, to this information. And there are people embodied on planet Earth that don't have Lemurian like soul connections for sure, or Atlantean. Like there are people who I'm just assuming that again, like if you're drawn to this, it's pretty likely that you do, you know. Um, okay, so I want to share some of these comments here. Uh, about the okay, so intentionally developing conscious relationships with people has been the most challenging thing for me. So maybe the aspect of like developing the relationship rather than just I mean, I think that's a big thing for people too in the time of post pandemic as well. Like,
Mhm.
and if you're not somebody who goes to bars or, goes to different kinds of social events where you might meet people, like how do you actually begin a
Yeah.
connection?
And that will be indicative in the aloha process I'm going to teach. I will teach you a way of relating that starts with attunement and requires mystical awareness in order to be able to connect, but it will take your relational capacity to the next level.
Mm,
And one thing I want to say in this day and age, this is really true, is relationship is not inherent, or like the ability to relate is not an inherent skill in most of us. It's a skill that we need to develop and practice over time.
yes.
And we, because we're around a lot of people, and some people certainly have a natural affinity. Like I have more of a natural affinity for vibration and energy and the mystical, where somebody else might have a natural affinity for music and singing. We're all unique, but relationship
Yes.
is a skill that we develop through practice and time. So we'll be teaching you
Yes.
some ways for how to do that, how to deepen in connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited for that part. I think it's like yeah, it's going to be incredible, because yeah, I think, it's just the experiential element is so important and the embodied element of all of this is so important. It's like we can sit around and have discussions about the history and how cool it is and everything. Which I just want to say, I deeply appreciate like all of the knowledge that you bring to the table here, like, and all of your like the information that you do give, because I think it's really activating also, and it's really and it can be really important. So I'm not saying like we shouldn't talk about that at all, but I think like this isn't something. to be met with the mind, just like relationships are not something to just be met with the mind. Like there is a component of embodied experience that is 100% required for all of this, you know. And so there's the embodied experience of receiving the activations of the energy work, um, some of the shamanic journeying where you get to actually connect with these energetics in your body in a different way and connect with your channel of information. And information, when I say that, isn't just the mind, it's like the coding that gets turned on where you're feeling, sensing, knowing certain things, right? And then also the embodied experiential component of relating in a new way, which I've been talking about for years. Those of you who've followed me since before I started doing DNA work, is it's like that's how we heal. That's how we heal. Like that is how we heal ourselves. That is how we heal the world. It's probably the most important piece of what we're offering, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously we'll drop the link in the comments for you guys to join in. It's going to be July 14th and 15th, I believe.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, yeah, Phoenix, do you want to share more information actually for people? Because I'm kind of blanking on that right now.
Yeah. July 14th and 15th, 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. It'll be around 2 hours each day. Recordings and replays will be available, so you can invest in the workshop and also have access to the recordings if you can't attend live. However, live we will be doing the relational practices. We're going to be doing some history of Lemuria information. We're going to be doing vibrational frequency DNA upgrades. We're going to be doing journeys to remember from the personal space, and then we will have some type of embodiment practice each day as well. And again, the first day is going to be largely about remembering Lemuria. The second day is going to be deeply about the relational practice, or the Lemurian Way of Love, which is what the workshop is called. And and so yeah, and then we might do another relational a cauldron after, so that people can practice and
Mhm.
integrate the information more. We don't have that clearly set up yet, but we've talked about it. But we will be giving you all of these parts: transmission, frequency upgrades, access to the Akashic records through this 2-day experience with us.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
I'm so
Just feeling
excited.
into the energy of it and just like the shamanic portal that's like opened there.
Mhm.
Um, I'm pumped. I'm super pumped. I'm not even gonna lie. So it's $111 is the regular ticket price, but we have options if that feels out of reach for some of you. For what's the percentage of the discounts that
We
we're
have a 20% discount and a 50% discount if you need a little financial break because of the times.
right? Which I think is like 88 or 55.
55.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, the tickets will range depending on what is available to you from 111 or from 55 to 111. So, you know, you hopefully it's accessible for more people that way, you know, and people can also like it's even a bit of a practice, I would say, of tapping into truth and integrity for yourself and meeting what is, um, in a spirit of transparency and love, to look at those options and really be with like what is true about, you know, and like, you know, maybe it's that, you know, actually I, even though there's part of me that's like, oh, like I want it cheaper. Like, of course I want it cheaper. Like, it actually feels like I want to support this, and I have the resources, right, to invest in the full ticket price. or it's meeting the truth of like, you know what, I can't do that right now. That would be um out of reach for me, out of range for me. And, this is what's really honoring. So it's like looking at that. I think I want to encourage this practice of like what is really honoring, you know, and of course, what's true
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, from the full being and not just the mind.
from the
The
full
mind sphere.
being.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I would
and the
agree.
beautiful thing is the recordings will have the, practices so that you can go in, you can explore different aspects of Lemuria through some of the journeys that we're gonna do. You know, I was with a close friend over the week, and she said, "You're like my big sister, and I wanna do some mystical practice." So I said, "Okay, well, I'm getting ready to do a Lemuria workshop. We're going to go to Lemuria." And so I guided her into this experience, and we
Oh,
pulled
cool.
different records to look at, but we were in the same place, just as our own perspective. And so it was really beautiful to bring her along to be in the practice of accessing the Lemurian consciousness, and then to also be getting the same information.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really
Mhm,
affirming. I love when that
mhm,
happens.
mhm. Yeah. So it was a really beautiful connective experience for us.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm so excited. I literally can't wait. I think, you guys can definitely message me or message either of us with questions.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you can reach out to either of us with questions. You can put them in the comment again, in the comments. Again, we're going to put the link in the comments so you can check out, all the details are going to be there and you can register there. Um, yeah, anything else that you want to mention before we sign off for today?
No, I'm just grateful for this opportunity and the beautiful synergy and magic that unfolded between us. And I'm excited to share it with
Yeah.
all those that feel called to the frequency.
Yeah, me
Mhm.
too.
Mhm.
I really hope to see you guys there.
See
All
you
right.
soon.
Thank you, Phoenix. Thank you, everybody who came to watch. And yeah, we will see you guys soon. So
Bye,
much love
everyone.
and aloha.
Aloha.